Again in studio, this time about technology. The technology is some sort of very difficult, but it's also very difficult to understand what would be the philanthropy. The philanthropy, together with the design of simple Ruby, it's not very easy. But of course, there is also the design of Rust. If you'll understand the Scala, also together with the simple technique approach, but also the policy from MicroAnts, you'll also understand the C lab and shim and the code, but also the school standard MEL and also Shift language much better. Of course, there are also some simple T language like TCL, but of course, there is also the MicroAnts visual. If you are going to look for more visual forms, of course, you can also find some image. Each image have some price, but not very high. It depends also if those images are more rare. To understand Kotlin and Karel, it's not easy, but also to understand the code together with the programming. If the program is made only with Julia, of course, it's much better if you add some Java to it. Not too much JavaScript and the webhooks. Probably it's better to build much better logo with no cheating on the web. It's much better to understand life without D, but if you use D only for the purpose of simple site you are presenting, the C, C++, and C Sharp are very difficult if you design very difficult programs, but of course, also the program of fruit could be shared together with millions of fruits imagery. Each image represents the fruit that humans can actually purchase in real life if they are not coding. To understand CSS, those could be quite corrupted when it comes to different five forms of visuals. On the web, sometimes everything is very complex and not easy to understand. But if you are going to put some effort into simple programming, you are going to find the MATLAB, Mercury, Miranda, and different forms of MoonScript, the Objective-C, OutSlams, Pascals, Perls, and different forms of programming language that are healthy if you use them in healthy way. Not all programmers are very healthy. To understand simple PHP, but also the pony, which is, of course, like some sort of the horse, but very difficult with anyone known or image, especially with activity. So do not rely too much on that pony. The code with pony can become simple or complex. It also depends what type of character you are working with. The Prolog and processing, especially Python, is used a lot. A lot of people use Python for different forms of snake language, which is very difficult, but it also exists on very visual forms. To understand different forms of C++, but also the micro and C++ are extremely complex, are also very difficult type of programming, and it's used together with different forms of semantics. To understand template in microAnts, it's not easy because it's the picture, and it built thousands of different exceptions. Not easy to understand all those designs. To understand static forms of code, it's also not easy, but as earlier mentioned, of course, compilers are also important. The C++ 17, it's very difficult, especially in microAnts, but also the C++ 16. To understand different forms of standards, it's not easy if we think about any number under 26. So it's very important to know that very legal work in microAnts is actually 26 plus to understand different forms of function, and that some developers are actually corrupted and they even cheat. So sometimes it is very, very important to understand ethical coding. Ethical coding, of course, it's not simple term, especially not in computer industry. To understand different questions and answers about microants is also not easy, but also not easy to understand simple forms of manager. To understand different forms of implementations, it's also not easy, but also to understand different forms of applications. To understand different forms of language, it's not easy, especially not with Python. To understand programming language in basic, but also the ethics, it's not easy, and how those are compiled with your website or developed. To understand the source code, it's usually not easy because it's related with licensing in California or depends where your servers are in your wallets. But also processing with the banks you are using, or of course, the eToys wallets. To understand different forms of the language, it's not easy, but we would also like to mention assembly language, which is some sort of machine code. It is very, very difficult form of the code that explain computer what computer should do with some users, but that can easily fall under low level language if it's used very, very wrong. To understand different forms of language together with coding and debugging is also important. But if you are really coding a lot and making more than 1,000 code per day, you are going to figure it out that ethics are far, far more valuable than any type of code. Of course, the minimum code should be provided, and that's the way you are actually going to build a simple microants processor or different forms of simple code that are going to serve you for a better and more ethical coding. And some picture might help also to understand all those figure in world, but once you realize you are not that figure, you should actually forget all the figure in the world and focus on the code. But once you figure it out that codes are very, very difficult, you are going to see that ethics are again important. And on some point, which is of course not logical at all, you'll need to return to the users or the figure. It also depends what kind of design or company you are building. To understand all those type of code, it's not easy, but also different type of brand processing around the world. If you are building a very, very complex brand, to understand different forms of store is also important, but also to understand different forms of size of the code. Sometimes it is very, very, very difficult to build safe code in life. To understand life, it's not easy. Some people are thinking about coding, but sometimes it is also important to think about simple computer. The simple computer and elegant design microants, which is also computer, but not a lot of them made. It is some sort of chip or circuit. The electronic circuits are extremely complex and not understood by humans. Even many men do not understand them very well. If we are thinking about smartphones, that's some sort of modern cancer, and it is very, very unrelated to programming. Some people even think that computers are like programming, but that's not correct because the computer is only simple device. But of course, once you start to use simple language, you are actually communicating with the computer. Not a lot of people in this world are able to do communication with computer directly. A lot of people only wish computers, but they will never understand computers. Of course, there are thousands of different careers possible in computer sectors. It depends if that's making computers and designs. Of course, some brands which have a lot or not a lot recognition should give you permission to build computers on their their brand logo. But of course, the computers can, in any case, whatever you think about them, provide work and provide work positions. Of course, computers can also provide informations. The correct informations are extremely difficult because the informations are simply too diverse. To understand different forms of computers and ethics, it's not easy, and especially if you think about Java and C and C++, but also about different forms of programming language together with microends. It's not easy to understand all those code and all those logos, but also what is the possibility to do with computer. The ethics might be the most important and not the mathematics. If you understand different forms of calculations, but also how critical some politics are and some people, you should actually understand that safe code, it is very difficult, but also different from those political people. To understand the programming in life, it's not easy, but also to understand the health of the coders or health of people in company. Sometimes people think that we are very programmable or that we can design a superior program, but on the end, you figure it out that you could not make anything very special. And you'll need to be satisfied with the most simple program and nothing very complex. Sometimes it's also very hard to control programs, and you should actually return back to electronics. That type of philosophy is not very easy. When we think about different forms of the servers, we also think about problems. The design of Dell actually built very good servers for the website. But if you think that there are going to be a lot of problems, also, the more people work in company or for brand, you'll figure it out. There are going to be thousands of extra problems. And if you think about problems from many points, you'll figure it out that not only server will build a company, but maybe you should actually have the television for your company so people could actually figure it out what type of ethics are necessary. A lot of people think about tablet computers. Those tablet computers are very difficult. And if we think a little bit more about how much people suffer on the web, you should actually not spend your day on media. If you spend your day on media, that's not going to be ethics, that's not going to be computer, that's only going to be your mobile phone, which is some sort of cancer. To understand different forms of the systems, it is also not easy when it comes to computer because there is actually also the DOS system. The DOS is very difficult program. A lot of people should understand that of course they have their computer, but that's nothing personal. A lot of people also use the internet, but when it comes to company, it's probably more closed area of the site, or you are only working for your site, so you are quite limited. To understand different forms of word processing together with the code, it's also not easy. Different forms of photos can also show what type of people are necessary in company. It is very difficult to understand what some computer can do and what could not do. Each time that some philosophy or theory about perfect company become too complex, or your brand become too complex, you must return with your thinking manners back to very simple forms with very simple forms of elegance. not too much work, with very, very simple graphics, with not complex cards, not complex word, and not complex computer. Sometimes it's very, very hard to build something, but also return to more simple forms. A lot of people and a lot of professionals in modern time, they are not able to go back for 6 years and think about things slightly different, maybe more simple and more elegant. Not easy to think about elegance from any point of view.